continue from where we stopped just now. So we were at about him announcing his death to his own daughter, Sayyidah Fatimah Zahra. And this story, like, if we have gone through the life of Sayyidah Fatimah Zahra, we've gone through this story several times. And this instance several times whereby he informs Sayyidah Fatimah Zahra about his coming death. And here he actually summoned for her to come. He called for her to come, and he sent for her, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Towards the end of his death, I think earlier on you mentioned, right, that his wives all agreed to let him rest his final, to rest, right, in the house of Sayyidah Aisha radiallahu anha. So when he wanted to meet his daughter Sayyidah Zahra, the Sayyidah Aisha, she went and she called for Sayyidah Fatimah. And we understand that Sayyidah Fatimah and Sayyidah Aisha, they are very far in age. So don't think that they are both near at all. They're very, very far in age. Sayyidah Aisha, at this point, when Rasul passed away, that she was about 18 years old. And because she was about 8 years old when they moved to Medina, and they're 10 years in Medina, so 18. Sayyidah Fatimah Zahra, she was 18, right, when they moved to Medina, around there, right, around that age, around between the age of 15 to 18. Right, so she was around age of 28. And Sayyidah Fatimah Zahra, she will pass away at age of 28 because she passed away 6 months after the death of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And there is this thing, there's such a thing called like a person, once someone has passed away, that they're just like their body begins to deteriorate. There's actually an Arabic word for it that Eddie Habib was using it. The Arabic word, of whereby it's a condition that a person is in because of the death of somebody else, that their own bodies begin to die a slow death, and they will lead to their death eventually. So the Fatimah Zahra, she faced that. And so when the death of Rasulullah, she was said to never smile ever again. And basically she grew thinner and thinner, right? And basically they began, you would say, to waste away in their physical being, right? That they just, because they have no more desire to be in this dunya anymore. Like their beloved has left this dunya, they want to follow where he has gone, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Right? So Sayyidah Fatimah Zahra, in 6 months, right, she basically she was dying a slow death, right, for 6 months. Sayyidina Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, it was 2.5 years from the death of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And it was said that Sayyidina Abu Bakr, while he was the strongest of the Sahaba, right, on the day of the death itself, that he stood firm, and he led the Sahaba on to continue the work that has been done by Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Internally, that he suffered so much pain, the pain of loss of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? That whenever they were around Sayyidina Abu Bakr, they could actually smell burnt meat, right, around him, right? And it was said that it was his liver or his heart burning out of a longing for the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, to the extent they became like a manifestation, right, inside of him, that they could feel this constant pain that he carried around with him wherever he went. And that happens to people, right? When they lose someone very close to them, the pain never goes away. It never diminishes. It never lightens up. It's just as fresh, right, as the day that they lost the beloved, the beloved, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that was for Sayyidina Abu Bakr and Sayyidina Fatimah Zahra, that was what happened to them. Right, they were of the companions who on the day itself, right, asked Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to take their soul. They couldn't handle the death of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Last week we mentioned about his animals. They could not handle the death of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They had no purpose thereafter, right? They only lived to serve the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So with him gone, like his camel, his donkey, all of his animals, they didn't want to live thereafter, right? They're done with this dunya. There's no more joy, right, for them in this dunya after the death of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So the Prophet ﷺ announces his own death to his daughter, Sayyidah Fatimah Zahra. The Prophet ﷺ called his daughter Fatima radiallahu anha and told her of his impending death. He gave her glad tidings of her status as the leading woman of the world's or the leading woman of this ummah, as in the narration in Sahih Bukhari. It is also narrated in Sahih Bukhari that Aisha radhiallahu anha said to Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam called for Fatima alayhi salam during his final illness and confided in her something that made her cry. And then he called her and confided in her something that made her smile. We asked her about that after his death, and she said, he confided in me that he would die as a result of his illness, so I cried. And then he then confided in me the news that I will be the first of his family to follow him, so I smiled. And the full narration, of what happened here was that Sayyidina Aisha said that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam called for Fatima. So she, sent them to Sayyidina Fatima Zahra that Rasul called for her. And all of them, they were very much aware of his illness, right? And they were all very worried, right, for him, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So of course, the moment she was called by the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, she came, hurriedly, and that was when Sayyidina Aisha saw the way she was walking, and she said that as Fatima approached the house, she walked the exact way her father walked, right? She didn't miss a step in the way she walked as how Rasulullah walked, right? And then Sayyidina Aisha was in the room, and she watched Sayyidina Fatima Zahra go near Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? And he whispered something to her, and then whereby she began to weep, and then he whispered something to her after that, and she began to laugh. And Sayyidina Aisha, she asked her, O Fatima, what was it that Rasulullah has told you? And she said, I will not expose the secret of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So after he had passed away, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, after he had passed away, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he then Aisha approached Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, approached Fatima Zahra, and she said, now can you tell me what was that incident all about? And that was when Sayyidina Fatima Zahra informed her that when the first time he whispered to me, he told me that Jibreel usually comes. There was the narration, whereby that Jibreel comes to him every year. Once to go through and review or revise the entire Quran. And that for this year, Jibril came twice in Ramadan. It was in Ramadan. He came twice in Ramadan. And Rasulullah said that I only think that it is because I am to pass away before the next Ramadan. Right? And then he said to her, so be the best of those whom I have left behind, and be steadfast and be patient, right, on this calamity. And the Sahaba said it is the greatest calamity that have ever afflicted them. The day whereby Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam came into Medina, Sayyidina Anas radiallahu anhu narrates that was the most illuminated day ever, the most joyous day ever in Medina. And the day whereby Rasulullah passed away in Medina, that was the darkest day to have afflicted Medina. It was as if someone took away the light that came into Medina. And actually it was in fact they had gone into the normal state of being in other parts of the world. It was just that for example in their midst, that they were in this brilliant light of guidance of the Prophet ﷺ. So being in that way for 10 years, being with him. So when he passed away, they actually went back to the normal. So they felt they plunged into darkness. But it was actually compared to the brilliance of the light of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that what was a normal state of the environment it seemed like darkness. Right? They plunged into darkness. So Sayyidina Anas radiallahu anhu said that they have never faced a calamity worse than the loss of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. You cannot imagine, right? If any of us here have gone through the death of a loved one, someone close, that whatever pain that you might have experienced, and especially when it's new, right? That is fresh, and the pain is fresh. And whenever you think about the person, you begin to cry, and the aching. And after a while, it kind of it dulls down. Right, because it's time. Right? If time, the memory fades away. Right? You have memories here and there, But with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, it never faded away. For the Sahaba, it was as fresh as the day itself that he passed away. So whatever pain we have ever experienced in life, whatever form of emotional pain, but specifically the pain of loss, of death, that the Sahaba they experience a billion times worse. Right, worse than the pain that we could ever experience. Because for us, we came into this dunya with him already having passed from the dunya. So our experience of him, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, inshallah, it is just a matter of getting to know him better and getting closer to him, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Whereas for them, and while they are the closest of people to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, without any doubt, right, that to be in his physical presence and then to be out of his physical presence, right, that is a pain that we cannot understand, and that the Sahaba they went through. We cannot understand that kind of pain, mashallah. And this is why they just desire, just yearn to be.
Some of them practically just left Medina, right?
Yeah, Sayyidina Bilal, he just left Medina. It was Sayyidina Abu Hurairah, after a while he left Medina. Many of the companions, they couldn't take being in Medina. We spoke about Sayyidina Mu'az bin Jabal, right, when he was sent to the Yemen, and he was told by Rasulullah SAW that you will not meet me after this day, and perhaps when you come back, and when perhaps means it will happen, when you come back you will pass by this grave of mine, and you will pass by this masjid of mine, right? And there is his indication to Sayyidina Mu'az radiallahu anhu, that khalas, that you're not going to see me after today. And that was so Sayyidina Mu'az already did his pre-grieving, that he was told you're not going to meet him. It was the last meeting with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad. Right, so when Sayyidina Fatima Zahra, she began to weep when he told her that he only thinks that Jibril did that because it was the last Ramadan for him on this dunya, or in this dunya. Then Sayyidina Fatima Zahra, she began to weep, right, with the very thought of separation from her father sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Like for them, they know, we all believe in the hereafter. So we know the eventual abode whereby we will inshallah be unified, right, will be in Jannah. And Sayyidina Fatima Zahra, she's the highest of women, and she'll be the closest to her father in Jannah, right? But for her, even that 6 months of being in two different worlds, it is a matter of that, right? 6 months of being in two different worlds, that was too much for her to handle, right? To take, of separation from her father sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Which is why that when he told her, that she'd be the first of his family to join him, right, she smiled, and basically she was informed of her death. Right, she was informed that her death was very near, and then she was happy about it, because it meant being united with her father, being united with her mother, with her sisters. All of her family have gone ahead, right? And who's left for her in this dunya? Her entire family is gone. Sayyidina Ali, of course, is here. Her sons, her children are here, right? But her heart is with her father, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? And she just wanted to just be with him, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And in fact, before she passed away, she gave the wasiat Sayyidina Ali to marry her niece Umama, right? Her sister's daughter, right? Because she has young children. And Sayyidina Hussein, she has daughters as well, right? So that was her wasiat, because she trusted her niece to look after her own children the way a mother would look after her children. And that is something that people of the past, they would do, right? They would actually wasiat someone that they trust in their own family, right? If they knew they're going to pass away and they have small children, and they would wasiat that their husband to marry so and so of their family members for the sake of their children. Mashallah.
Big heart.
Big heart, mashallah. There was if you have read the Bidadari Bumi book by Suza Halima Al-Idrus, the second one, kan? The second book, she wrote about the story that how Badnoor narrates of a man who passed away and left behind his widow, at that point, who was 40 years old. And because the man and his widow, right, they had a business that they were handling, and it was a family business that was under the man's name. So the family, on the man's side, the deceased, the husband's side, right, they wanted to keep the business in the family, right, and not have it go out, right? So they also loved their brother's children as their own children. So they actually had a meeting, and they asked, amongst the men in the family, who can marry the widow of our deceased relative, our deceased brother, right, to keep in the family lah. And they saw that all of the men there were already married, and the only one who was unmarried was a 20-year-old nephew of theirs, right, who could marry basically his uncle's wife lah, right? So they actually, you can read the storyline, the dari Bumi, right, second book. and that so this boy was 20 years old marrying a 40-year-old his uncle's widow, right? That he initially he resisted. He didn't want to marry someone so old. He said it's my auntie, you know, and I grew up knew her as my auntie. How can I marry her and all that? But eventually he gave in to his family's request. Right, so he married her, and the story goes that that he and the father even said to him, you know what, you're a young man, right? Marry her, like keep everything in the family, and later on you can marry a younger woman if you like, and you don't have to stick to one wife. We are people who marry more than one woman, right? And this is how the father reasoned with him, but 20 years in the marriage and she's 60 now and he's 40 now, he never married again, like, over her. And in fact, even when she grew old, he looked after her. And when his father said to him, don't you want to marry again? We know we pushed you into the marriage because of family affairs, right? But now she's an old woman, and the woman of the family will look after her. We're not going to abandon her, we'll look after her, right? But you can go ahead and marry a younger woman if you like, right? And he rejected his father's proposal, and he said to his father that she's the best of wives that a man could ever ask for. Right, the way she would smile at me and treat me, and her gentleness, and her understanding, and her, mashallah, like you can read the book lah, the way Ustazah Halimah like describes, like mashallah, and the way he described his wife, and he said that I would never leave her, much less marry over. I would never marry over her, much less leave her, because the father was saying, don't leave her, she's going to stay in our family, but just marry over her, marry another one. But he said, I'm not even thinking of marrying another one, and I would never think of even leaving her, of how much she's given of her life to me. MashaAllah. It's all the people of MashaAllah, and Sahaba know, she said that be like that, right? Be like that, be a joy in the heart of the people in your family. Be a joy, and be a smiling face, be a gentle voice, be a solace, a source of solace, right, for these people. May Allah give us ability lah, inshallah. I mean, right. So I can't remember why I was mentioning that, right, but Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad. Right, so Sayyidina Fatimah Zahra, yes, so Sayyidina Fatima, right, in 6 months that she passes away from illness. Right? And of course, if you read online, there are a lot of slander on Sayyidina Umar and Sayyidina Abu Bakr about the death of Sayyidina Fatima Zahra, right? And understand that the Sahaba of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, inshallah, as when we get past the death of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we go into the Khalifa, the years of the Khalifas. We will be I will go through it thoroughly as to what really happened after the death of Rasulullah SAW, with regards to the electing of the next Khalifa, and what happened in Sayyidina Ali and Sayyidina Abu Bakr, and then what happened in Sayyidina Fatima Zahra, and that she eventually passed away after 6 months of the death of her father. Basically she was Sayyidina Fatima Zahra, she's suffering, from the loss of her father, and she was just longing to be with him, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That was it. Right, no, that was all. But if you read online, and I don't at all recommend anyone reading anything about Sayyidina Fatimah Zahra or Sayyidina Ali or Sayyidina Hassan, Sayyidina Hussein online. I don't go there, because you or about Sayyidina Abu Bakr, Sayyidina Umar, Sayyidina Uthman, online, because it's a lot of slander, and you don't want to read slander on our companions, on the companions of Rasulullah, right? But get your sources from our teachers, our scholars. Right, then you can have a clear and a balanced view of really what happened. Because after the years of prophethood, you go into the years of ijtihad. Right? And this is basically what it is. It's ijtihad. Right? Ijtihad is basically every person, every human being. You're no longer prophets. There's no revelation. There is no infallibility. There is no there is room for mistake. There is room for mistake. For prophets, there is no room for mistake. They don't make mistakes. So you're looking at years whereby, can Sayyidina Abu Bakr make a mistake? Yes, he can. Right? Can Sayyidina Umar make a mistake? Yes, he can. Sayyidina Osman, Sayyidina Ali, Sayyidina Fatima Zahra, all of them can make mistakes. They're all human beings. They're not prophets. Right? So we, to not raise the Sahaba to the level of prophethood. They're not prophets, but we raise them to the.
At the same time, not to provoke children.
Yeah,
So still companion.
yeah, they're
Still,
Sahaba
yeah.
still.
How
So
about the way they talk? It's like,
yeah, so the Sahaba. So not to raise them the level of prophets, but not to bring them down to the level of as if they're like us. No, they are Sahaba. Right? They are Sahaba. They have a level by themselves that will be forever for them. Nobody can how he himself sallallahu alaihi wasallam said about Sayyidina Uthman, no one can harm Uthman after this day. When Sayyidina Uthman gave, in charity, all the wealth that he gave, to sponsor how many people for the Battle of Tabuk, Sayyidina Uthman. So when he came with that wealth, Rasul said, nothing will harm Uthman after this day. It means nothing will harm his station, his position, anything of him, radiallahu anhu. No one can say anything about Uthman after today. Right. So I mean, already given the confirmation, the guarantee from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Right. So we just understand that what happened with Sayyidah Fatimah Zahra was that she basically deteriorated physically after the death of her father. Right. She had no mood, right, to eat or to continue or to just waiting for her death. And in fact, that she was told about her death coming, she knew it's coming lah. She's waiting for the day whereby she's able to pass away and enjoying her father and her sisters and her mother, right, that she misses so dearly. The Prophet ﷺ prays for his companions and instructs them. And so 6 days before his death, a group of his companions gathered in Aisha's house, radiallahu anha. The Prophet ﷺ welcomed and greeted them. He prayed for their guidance, victory and prosperity. And then he said to them, I enjoin upon you the taqwa of Allah, to have awareness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and entrust you to him and leave you in his care. I am but a clear warner to you from him, and that you do not put yourselves above Allah regarding his servants and his land. Right? For Allah has said to me and to you, that is the abode of the hereafter which we ordain for those who desire neither dominance upon the earth nor corruption, and the end belongs to those who are reverent, and those who have taqwa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he says that on the day of resurrection, you will see those who lied against Allah having darkened faces. Is there not in hell an abode for the arrogant? Right? So he made it clear to them that as believers, we don't desire this dunya, but we desire the akhirah. We are focused on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He then told them of his impending death and of his fast approaching departure to join Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Sayyidina Aisha radiallahu anha said, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam called for Uthman bin Affan radiallahu anhu. He came and they were alone, of the men, since Aisha remained and she reported this. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam started speaking to him, and Uthman's face began to change. Some of what was said to him was, O Uthman, perhaps Allah will bestow upon you a garment garment meaning of position or responsibility. So if the hypocrites seek to make you shed it, to remove it, do not do so. Later, An-Nu'man bin Bashir would say to Aisha, O mother of the believers, how could you have forgotten this hadith? She said, I forgot it by Lord of the Kaaba until the man was killed. And then Sayyidina Uthman was killed. So basically what happened here was that Rasulullah SAW, in leaving this world, right, he's basically tying up issues and matters that will happen after his death. Right? Loose ends, of things that is going to happen. And even for Sayyidina Uthman, this is like what will happen to him is going to be a good 26 years into the future. Right? So because Sayyidina Abu Bakr will take the caliphate for 2.5 years, Sayyidina Umar about 10 years, and Sayyidina Uthman about 13 years. So you count all together, and it's about 26 years into the future for Sayyidina Uthman. Right, so so he will not go into office. So called, he will be a caliph until 26 years into the future. Can you imagine? Right now, if you like at our age, for example, now I'm 30 plus. Right, 26 years into the future, I'm in my 50s. So someone's telling you right now at your age, 26 years later on, right, something's going to happen to you, and this is my advice to you. And that's how Rasulullah actually gave his advice to the Sahaba, his prophecies. He would tell them, this will happen to you, right? So do this when this happens. So then Aisha, same thing. If any of you have learned fiqh tahawulat, inshallah, last few years ago, right, we had a dawrah on it, right? That Sayyidina Aisha was given so many indications, right? That when you hear the dogs barking, oh Aisha, right? Once he was with his wives, he said, which of you will hear the dogs barking, in this place, further towards Iraq, right? And Sayyidina Aisha began laughing at dogs barking, and then he turned to her and said, "Perhaps you, like, O Red One, you are the one who will hear these dogs barking." So when years into the future, the 26 years passed into the future, right? When she was in that area and she heard the dogs barking, and then she remembered the hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam saying this about 30 years ago, and and she said, "Where are we?" And they told her, and then she was like, "Bring me back," because she knew there was an indication from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, don't stay there, go, just run. But they forced her on, and that was what led to the battle between her and Zainal Ali. But it wasn't between her and Zainal Ali, it was between the hypocrites in her army against the people in Zainal Ali's army. Right? So the Sahaba themselves, be very clear, the Sahaba themselves never fought each other. They never did. It was the people in the army who were instigators, and they fought each other and they would instigate. But in the battlefield itself, one-on-one, when a Sahaba met another Sahaba, a Sahabi met another Sahabi, they would turn around and walk away. Right? They would not fight someone they know who is Sahaba of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But they would not. Right? So there's the Sahaba and Sahaba, but they were basically on defense, right, in that situation. Just very very clear about that. So basically, Sayyidina Uthman, Rasulullah has informed Sayyidina Uthman, and we don't know, because a lot of these things the Sahaba kept it as secret. Right? We don't know what Sayyidina Uthman kept to himself. We don't know what Sayyidina Ali kept to himself. We don't know what Sayyidina, Abu Bakr, Sayyidina Umar, Sayyidina Hassan, Sayyidina Hussein, what they did. Because when you look into the history, you see them behaving in ways whereby they could even go against the opinion of majority of the Sahaba, right? And they would stand their ground in what they were doing. Right? And then you're wondering, how come they didn't hear what the other Sahaba were saying? And why were they, very persistent on what they were doing? We don't know where they were being instructed, like in their dreams or even before that, before some passed away. Like they have been given information and given instruction from before. So just because it has not reached us in narration doesn't mean that it was not there. It could possibly be that Sayyidina Uthman was given a lot of instruction of what to do. Right? So when Sayyidina Uthman, and there was another hadith from before this, right, that Sayyidina Abu Dhar al-Ghifari, if I'm not wrong, he came out one day and he was looking for Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he found Rasulullah, on a well, sitting at the edge of a well, with his legs dangling into the well. And he said to himself, "Today I will be a guard for the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam." As a famous hadith. Right? So then, so soon Sayyidina Abu Bakr came to the door. He knocked on the door, right? And then he told Rasulullah that is Abu Bakr, and he is seeking permission to enter and to sit with you. So Rasulullah said to him, "Let him in and give him the good news of paradise." So he entered and he sat next to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Then after a while, Sayyidina Umar came. Same thing. He said, "Who is that?" So Umar, and he goes into Rasulullah and he says, "Ya Rasulullah, Umar's here. I seeking permission to let him in and give him the good news of paradise." And Sayyidina Umar came in, and then after a while, Sayyidina Uthman appeared, and then so when he knocked, and then he said, "Who is it?" And he said, "Uthman." And he said, "Hold on, let me ask for permission for you." And Rasul said, "Let him in and give him the good news of paradise, but after trial." Only Sayyidina Uthman got that information. Sayyidina Umar, given the good news of paradise. Sayyidina Uthman, good news of paradise after trial. He will be tested, Sayyidina Uthman.
He was informed of it.
He was informed of Sayyidina Uthman. And so Sayyidina Uthman, when he was informed of it, he said, "Allahu musta'an, Allah will help me." So when he came in, he was he found no more space around Rasulullah, so he sat a bit further away. And the one who was looking in at the situation, that years later, after they all had died, he realized it's how they're going to be buried. Right, that Sayyidina Umar will be near Rasulullah next to him, and then Sayyidina Uthman will be all the way at the end of Al-Baqi'. And that was because it was said that the companions were afraid that the hypocrites would mutilate the body of Sayyidina Uthman. So they brought him to the end of Al-Baqi' at night, and they buried him there to protect the body of Sayyidina Uthman radiyallahu anhu. So Rasulullah informed Sayyidina Uthman, right, that you will be given the cloak, like, meaning you will be given position. Right? You'll be in some form of position, you'll be given, and that the hypocrites will try their best to remove it from you. Do not let them remove it. So when you see Sayyidina Uthman, and no matter how hard they tried to bring him down and to overthrow him, that he refused to budge from his position, not because he was in love with position in any form. They all Sahaba, they all don't care.
That's how they
They
twist
don't,
it.
they don't want position. They don't want responsibility also. They want to get out of this place. They don't want to be questioned on the day of judgment. So for them, as far as possible, someone else can go ahead and take the caliphate. They don't want to be, in that position. But because he was given instruction, Sayyidina Uthman, he has no choice but to stay in position and not allow the hypocrites to overthrow him. He until they kill him. And that's what Sayyidina Aisha said, that she forgot that she actually heard Rasulullah tell Sayyidina Osman about this only after he died. Then she realized, and then she remembered the hadith. And there's a lot of them also wondering, Sayyidina Osman, he was doing things that even up till today we don't understand what he was doing, Sayyidina Osman, and why he did what he did. Allahu Alam. A lot of slander against Sayyidina Uthman, and he is one of the most gentle Sahabi. You read about him, gentleness, sweetness, his penyamai, very, very sweet, always smiling, Sayyidina Uthman, mashallah, you have this, image of him, Sayyidina Uthman. He's not like Sayyidina Umar, Sayyidina Abu Bakr, he's a different, kind. And it was said that his leniency was what had led for the people to uprise against him, right? That he tried to please people as far as he could to appease situation, right? But they uprose against him and they slandered him. There's a danger of slander also. It's named so much to the point that people the people had hatred of him, Sayyidina Uthman. And they eventually murdered him, the Muslims, right? They killed him in his own house with him reading the Quran that he had compiled and sent over the Muslim world, Sayyidina Uthman. And they even prevented him from taking water from a well that he himself bought and waqaf for the Muslims. He bought the well from the Jew. You know the story of the well, whereby the Jew, he say, I buy half, you buy half. And then eventually the Jew said, okay, those who, on my day, I'm going to sell it for this amount. And then on his day, Sayyidina Osman said, for free. And eventually nobody went to his well on his day. Like, only went on the well on Sayyidina Osman's day. Like, that well, that is still there today in Medina. They actually prevented Sayyidina Uthman from taking water from his own well. In his well.
That's how bad it is.
Yeah, that was how much they had so much hatred for Sayyidina Uthman. That's how slander can destroy society. Because it's all slander. It was all, Sayyidina Uthman was all slander, su'udhan, it was bad opinion and everything. Right, so Rasulullah actually informed Sayyidina Uthman of this. And he made a lot of statements about how Sayyidina Uthman, he cannot be harmed thereafter. You cannot say bad things about Uthman. That he is Zun-Nurayn. He is the one who was married to two of the daughters of Rasulullah. And if he had more daughters, he would have married them, Sayyidina Uthman. So, no matter what people were going around slandering about Sayyidina Uthman, we reject all of that. And because Rasulullah already gave him the seal of approval. And in fact, he's of the 10 who are given the good news of paradise. Alhamdulillah. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad. What time is it? Okay, we're at 9:43. Yeah. Okay, we will stop there because the next part is the last khutbah that Rasulullah SAW gave. We'll take bit by bit, inshallah, until we reach the end. Let's see if there are any questions. MashaAllah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless everyone. And Nurdida, alhamdulillah. Happy having you here. She's from the Dawrah. She comes from Sirah, mashallah. Any questions? Any questions? With the dua after Maulid. Allahumma salli wa sallim ala